Welcome back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And our guest this week is Vijay Rajendran. I apologize. I hope I got that right. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
I've
Jerry.
worked closely with Indian folks for a decade, and I still destroy last names. I apologize sincerely. So Vijay's background is in the startup space, unsurprisingly for being on our show. His focus is coaching to help startups get to the next level, as well as being a published author in the space. That is definitely too short of an introduction. Vijay, could you expand a little bit?
Sure. Thank you, Jerry. And thank you so much for having me on today. This is such a treat. My experience has really been as a founder and someone who has been of service to entrepreneurial leaders. And that shows up in the way that I coach a number of founders and senior executives in startups, in addition to writing. So the book, The Funding Framework, is something we can talk about. And then in addition, I help build companies, and I've been doing it for years, and work closely with a venture builder called GAI Ventures to do just that.
That's awesome. And I'll tell you, being an exited founder as well, I think it gives you a perspective that those folks offering coaching and services that haven't been through the process lack. So I imagine you've pulled from your own experience quite a bit.
My own experience, and which is an expensive education, but yes, definitely comes into the picture.
Yes. People might not realize that Vijay and I are each 18 years old. This is what being in the startup ecosystem does to you.
Exactly.
So you'd mentioned your book, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And then I'd like to turn the topic over to like what specific coaching you offer within the startup space. That's kind of a broad area.
Yeah, of course. So the book is called The Funding Framework: How to Secure Startup Funding with Confidence. And the genesis of the book was during my time at the venture firm 500 Global, also known as 500 Startups. Now, I spent a lot of my time working with founders who were trying to fundraise. The process and the message was often the same. And what I needed to do was then take what was a little bit of mystery about how to raise money and, of course, a bunch of disparate opinions, and really codify that into a four-step process. And so the process is laid out there is that you want to start not with, the idea, hey, I need to, find out if you will be an investor or if you will introduce me to someone, but instead understand what is my unique story, what is it I'm going to put out there into the world, and then from storytelling go into really great organization and being truly prepared to fundraise, then outreach, much like you would in a sales process, and then finally closing, which requires great project management skills in order to get a fundraising process done, because it's not done till the check clears the bank.
Yes. You mentioned fundraising. I've noticed the last couple of years specifically, the fundraising landscape has changed so much. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that as well from your perspective?
Yeah, I have, and I think this will be familiar to some of your viewers and listeners, because the biggest change, of course, has been the impact of AI, specifically Gen AI. And what that means is that investors are, particularly if they're generalist investors, they are going to be impressed and swayed by the growth rates of a handful, and feels like a handful of companies that are achieving extraordinary growth with small teams and in very short period of time. So, I understand the frustration of founders who, set out their business plan in 2020 or 2021, and they thought, if I get to $100,000, then I'm going to get a seed round. If I get $1 million in revenue, I'm going to get my Series A. And product market fit is somewhere in between those two numbers, when in fact the goalpost just shifted, and it's become 3 to 5 times that amount of revenue in order to sometimes qualify for the same degree of fundraising. And so it's important to think, these are stages, but what does good look like at this stage versus that stage? And I think that's where the goalposts at the very least have changed. And that's what feels different to founders, and certainly what is across the minds of nearly every investor.
Now, you mentioned specifically monetary goals and monetary locations that folks are looking for these different rounds at. Are there any other milestones that have changed, or is that similar to what it's been in the past as far as the product itself, the maturity of the company, go to market,
Yeah.
those things?
I think it's a great question. I mean, what I'm seeing talking to founders across other spaces, so think of like medtech, where the regulatory world just changed a lot in the last 6 months. And there are certain things that they expected they would get from grants and other resources or capital they would have from investors. And that equation has changed, as some of the things they thought they would get from grants or from university collaboration, something like that, has changed. And so this is, a fundamental feature of entrepreneurship is, stuff happens and you have to adapt and figure it out really quickly, because you ultimately are building something at a reasonable speed with few and inadequate resources. I think that's one area outside of the financial expectations. Another area, and this is something that I've been involved in for a couple of years, is in the area of what for a long time we've called climate change, and I remember before that we called it green tech, and sometime before that clean tech. In that world, the regulatory regime has changed. The expectations of the market and what will be brought online, and everything from EV adoption to the investment in grid infrastructure and in renewables has shifted shifted a lot and very fast. So when I speak to people in that field, they're maybe expanding the time it's going to take to reach the same milestone, and trying to communicate that to investors and figure out how do we stay in business for this long haul? How do we look more creatively at other markets, maybe even outside the United States, for the solution or technology that we have? And that, I think, is another field that is changing based on like the macro conditions.
That makes sense. Circling back to your coaching services, are they predominantly around preparing for fundraising and the fundraising process, or do they extend into the operations of the business itself?
Yeah. Basically, I work with leaders to become the best version of themselves. So I don't have a playbook for how, you, Jerry, can be like some facsimile of some great leader you respect, like Steve Jobs or something like that. Rather, what we're trying to do is figure out what's your superpower, and how do we bring more of that into the world to drive your business to greater results. Now, there are 3 very coachable moments at every stage of a business, and particularly at the early stage. And one of them is fundraising. And I think that's where people need to see there is strong founder market fit. So your story and who you are and knowing who you are and being that the best version of yourself is going to either show up or not in terms of the velocity and amount of capital you can raise. Secondly, there's founder-led sales. And for all the B2B businesses out there, the founder has to sell, and that may be uncomfortable. There are a lot of product-led and buyer-led go-to-market motions, and I think that is like tempting. And if that works, good. If not, then there's got to be a way in which you show up. Again, learning a new skill, but being effective and a great learning machine working with your customers. And then the third part is about building and scaling teams. And that sounds like something that applies to somebody with a 50-person headcount, when in fact, actually, it starts at the very beginning, because your first 10 to 20 people set, either intentionally or unintentionally, the culture of your company, the relationship and way in which you communicate in a high quality or more dysfunctional way with your co-founder, sets the pace at which you ship, you meet customers' expectations, you do all the things that establish traction and then fundraise, as opposed to the other way around. People think if we just score this deal, if we just ship this thing, if we just raise that money, then everything's going to be fine. But actually, you need to be right with your core team, and particularly that co-founder, if you have one, in order to be successful. So that is how I work in those three dimensions: funding, sales, and people, to be really tactical, but also consistent and aligned with what it takes for you to be the best leader you can be.
Yeah, I love that. That is so hand in glove with our own process when we're working with early stage companies. I don't do anything in the funding space. That's not something I personally have a lot of experience with, so I leave that to people that do. But the founder led sales, first of all, and I will die on this hill. If you, as the founder, aren't the initial salesperson, you're virtually guaranteeing the failure of your organization. You or your co-founder. I will
Yeah.
I will bend that far, but one of you two.
Yeah. Absolutely. Someone has to show up and be that that face of the company to learn what the customer's going through, have that empathy in order to build the right thing. I totally agree. That makes a ton of sense.
As a long-term salesperson, a person who hires national sales teams and creates go-to-market strategies, every startup founder I talk to who says to me, I'm just going to hire a senior salesperson and let them do it, I let them know that they're going to run out of money before that happens. Before you go for that scene, first of all, if you're a generic startup that doesn't already have any kind of traction, the person taking the risk in that relationship is the salesperson more than the founder. So getting their attention is by itself difficult, because it's their reputation on the line, working for, again, assuming you're relatively generic, if you already have traction. And they're going to struggle to find a way to sell something that they don't understand because it's brand new. And you as the founder, if you can, even if you hate it, even if it's, nails on a chalkboard for you, if you can carry that ball to the point that you can describe to a person the how, why, what, where, and when, and give them a process to follow, you can go to market more intelligently to find somebody who will work in that circumstance and give them a support network to have some opportunity of success.
Yeah, because I think the usual sort of hack that people think they're pulling off is, well, I'm hiring Jerry and he's worked at this big tech company, so he must know what he's doing.
Oh my
As
gosh.
opposed to, I've spent a year really getting to know this channel. And now that I know the channel, I know who can be successful working this channel, as opposed to what other company was successful with that salesperson.
I'll go one step further, and then I'm going to step away because we're in perilous running down a tangent territory right now. But one that you just hit on, one of the biggest mistakes I see all the time, not just in sales mind, but in hiring in general. They came from a giant tech firm. That is, whenever those words come out of your mouth, the next words should be, which is why I didn't hire them. Because if you're a little 3-person company working out of Steve Jobs' old garage, someone coming from a giant tech firm, you might as well be from another planet. They don't identify with what you're doing. They're used to having a level of support you're not going to be able to provide them for literal years. The way you go to market is going to be wildly different than the way they go to market representing a giant. Everything is different. The worst thing you can do in nearly every circumstance is to hire somebody from a company that you wouldn't represent a department in. Yeah. It's just colossal error.
Absolutely.
So moving back from the tangent ledge, and then the third thing you mentioned that I'd like to talk about a little bit as well is and I love the way that you'd said it, is that first 20 people, your core team, they establish your culture, whether by design or not. I talk about culture a lot. I could not agree more. But I'd like to take it one step further for the companies that are scaling in the audience, and that's this. One of the things I see, especially on the services side, technology services side of the equation, a company will have an amazing culture. They'll do incredible work. They'll establish a strong reputation. They'll see explosive growth, and then their reputation will fall apart. And what happens in nearly every iteration of that circumstance is that core team went outside of the company, hired in a bunch of folks to represent that next layer of management because there are too many people for them to manage directly. and then failed to inculcate their culture and philosophy in that next layer of management. And that next layer of management essentially completely changes the culture, typically by random, because had you the foresight to do what we're describing, you would have designed this. And that
Yeah.
random change is what causes that dissolution of that original excellence.
So you have a bunch of people who come in from the outside
Yes.
and they look around and figure out quickly for themselves what works around here. Who do I need? Who am I supposed to be keeping happy? How do we like to communicate? And that's what the good people will do. Other people will
Yes.
like try and say, well, at whatever big company or larger startup I was at, this is how we did things, and try and bring that in. So there's two parts. There's one, there are things you can learn from others, and I think that's really good because probably you don't have a lot of hygiene, probably you don't have a lot of process. So the first group that you described at the beginning, that early group is usually generalists, and you need them, and some of them are going to grow to the next stage, and others are just not going to thrive there. And maybe there's a new role or new thing that they need to work on, or their energy and talents are going to take them someplace else, and that's okay. But that next layer are going to be typically your first group of specialists. So what you're trying to do is benefit from their expertise when it comes to process, but have them understand these are like the values that we have as an organization, and these are the things that we choose to do and choose to not do. And again, when you're running around like with your hair on fire, like it's really hard to sit down and contemplate what are my values, what should the company value, what things do we do and not do, how do we value and think about our customer and our people. And all of that is like, stuff where people say to themselves, of course, I believe this, and of course, everybody knows, but you probably haven't made it explicit yet if you're a leader of a startup in this like scale up and growth phase. And so this is where things break, because people who didn't come out of the trenches with you, haven't had that formative experience. And so they need to be given a way to feel belonging and understand how you're going to bring these, what I think of as the 3 R's of building company culture, which is how do you give people, respect, recognition, and rewards? Because that's something we're all trained to do from childhood, and people respond very quickly. And as I said, they're looking around and figuring out what is going to be successful there, because they want to be successful there, and so having a plan and then being the thing that you live and do every day is very important.
I couldn't agree more. And the generalist specialist transition is something I talk about and write about often. But I'm going to take a step away from that only because we talk about it often. But say this as well. From a personality perspective, there are folks that thrive in that hair on fire environment. Mm-hmm. I'm one of those folks. You get addicted to the chaos structure you find offensive and a crime against humanity. So that's your world. And once the organization grows past that, it starts to feel almost claustrophobic. I know in the last year of Apicero, I was actively unhappy. Not that the company was bad. I'm just not a big company person. I like that small environment. So when we sold, I was ecstatic. And I know lots of folks like that. To your point, that transition is often as much personality makeup as it is skill set. The other thing sorry, go ahead.
What do you think it is that feels uncomfortable once you get to a certain size?
I am an agent of chaos. I don't take it to the level, and I'm not talking politics when I say this, but I don't take it to the level of President Trump where I flip a table and see where things land. But I do like that agile, high sense of urgency. Everything is changing every minute world. It keeps me on my toes. When I get something down cold and I can do it almost by rote, I get very bored very quickly.
Yeah. Exactly, and that is a personality thing, and that means you want to be walking every day and seeing what pops up and responding to that.
As bad as I know this is from a performance and mental health
Mm-hmm.
perspective, I like to walk into a meeting cold and see what I can do with it. You can do that in a small company.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other thing I've noticed too is in that core team. Again, this is a gross generalization, but there
Mm-hmm.
tends to be more of a mission passion focus versus a job career focus. A lot of those folks in those early stage companies, they look up from their work and realize 12 hours have passed. Whereas in a lot of these bigger companies, the person looks up from their work and they realize they have 7 hours and 55 minutes to go on their day. Um, and that might just be me projecting my negativity towards large organizations and being a chaos agent, but that's been my perspective.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's really important, whether you're talking about fundraising and dilution, or whether you're trying to communicate your plan for employee ownership and the stock option pool, right? That you are trying to create missionaries, yes, but missionaries who are owners, as opposed
Yes,
to mercenaries or people who only feel like they are employees and doing a job. So you create that through ownership, like literally, as I said, the rewards and recognition that make people feel valued, that make them feel like they're mastering something, that make them connect the purpose and their performance, all in one.
couldn't agree more. The core of the leadership principles that we teach our clients, we call it the EFG methodology: engage, fulfill, and grow. And really, the essence of it is if an employee feels heard and valued, they get fulfillment in the mission of the company, and they're consistently growing their skills and responsibilities, then you're incentivizing them to stay long term. And they typically won't leave until one of those three things breaks.
I think one of the hard things also as people are growing is people around you are looking to you and they're asking, what does good look like? And it's like, yes,
Yes.
do you know how do you understand this? And this is a an old idea, but like Andy Grove wrote in his book on high performance management that you know to manage someone you need to understand their work and how it
Yes.
should be done, right? This is kind of the opposite in a startup where sometimes we don't know anything, like if some days, right? And so you have that group of very creative and okay with ambiguity generalists, but after you add that next layer of specialists who try and create good process that is still compatible and with the company, you then have more and more people who are going to expect that somebody knows what good looks like. And so this is hard because you're going to learn a lot of skills as a founder or a leader in an early stage company, but you're going to struggle at times with explaining to others what good looks like when maybe you haven't seen it yourself yet.
100%. We've covered a lot of material. I feel like we've discussed a lot. Vijay, if you could give any startup founder or early stage leader one piece of advice, what do you think that would be?
So, going back to the first part of the funding framework regarding storytelling, I think a lot of people go into telling their story when it is meeting a customer, raising money, or trying to bring on a hire that they think will be impactful. They try and get out as much fact and information as they can and try and make that the message. When in fact, your key goal is to just be memorable so that later people, can't forget the message that you had for them, the story that you told. And that way you get the call back to the partners meeting at the fund, or you get to be top of mind and the first choice for an employee because they want to work with you and the story and the mission that you have. So That would be my top advice is to tell a powerful story that is memorable.
That makes a lot of sense. I think what happens a lot is the inner engineer comes out of the
Mhm.
person and they try to win them with logic, and they forget that nothing about sales is logical. It's all emotion.
Yeah, there are a lot of emotional purchases for sure.
Mm-hmm. So that's awesome. I do want to say, I want to circle back to what you talked about, understanding the person's job, and add
Hmm.
one element that I've seen in my experience.
Yeah.
That's understanding the motivation drive of the individual that you're leading.
Hmm.
I've found that the more that I can shape my message to that person through the lens of what they're trying to achieve, the more receptive they are to my message. I'll give you just a really quick example. Many years ago, actually more than 20, I'm somewhat embarrassed to say, I was managing a salesperson, just hired him into our team. I was a team lead then. And we were talking through new hire orientation. I asked him, so what are you trying to achieve personally over the next year? And he mentioned, I just got married a little while ago. We want to buy a house. We want to start a family. So every review we had from that point forward, I didn't say any more about it then, but every review we had, we went through the lens of how much money that person needed to eat to earn beyond their immediate needs to save for that house, what that was and what that broke down to, understanding a typical sales size for our team, product sales velocity, and all of those things. So that rather than say, hey, BJ, I need you to make X calls and get Y appointments and sell Z, hours of service, we did it all through that lens. And in just under a year, I was invited to the housewarming, when they moved in. So
That's awesome.
yeah, and I just found the more that you can make it about what they're trying to achieve. That's why I talk about so often to recruiters, when you're interviewing candidates for your company, make sure you understand what they're trying to achieve in their career, so you can build that career path into those employee reviews. And suddenly, that employee goes from loathing that whatever the tempo is monthly review to looking forward to seeing how they're progressing as it relates to the things they're trying to achieve, and making sure that they're on track to whatever it was that we promised them organizationally. Maybe it's the next certification or whatever.
That's awesome. I think that that's where, for people who are very rewards oriented and goal oriented, you need to dial it in and
Yes.
understand, is that what motivates them? For other people who might be more moved by your purpose or something like that, like, how can you give them a recognition so they feel very connected and they bring that, that energy to, the work that they're doing.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's clear we could do this for about another 4 hours.
Sure.
But as this isn't the Joe Rogan podcast, and we're not going to do 3 hour stretches, let's wrap this up here. And let me say emphatically, Vijay, you've been a wonderful guest. I'd love to have you back to explore any of these topics, more deeply. And in the interim, if people want to learn more about you and reach out, how can they do that? How can they find you?
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. So they can check out the funding framework that found where great books are available online. There's my AI twin, where 24/7 you can talk to the digital version of me that's being trained on a lot of my published works and writings. And then also there's my Substack, which is the Startup System Substack, where I write every week on go-to-market, fundraising, leadership, and things like that.
Awesome. And for long-term listeners, you already know those will be in the show notes. So no need to get into a car crash trying to write those things down. And for newer listeners, become older listeners by tuning in again next week. Until then, thanks again for being on the show, Vijay,
Thank you,
and I wish
Jerry.
you all the best.
Same to you. Thank you.
Thanks.